Welcome to Tejal Khandelwal Study Center. Let's revise Western political thought. Topic: Plato. Plato is a Greek philosopher. He is one of the most influential and creative political philosophers. In the entire history of European political thought, no thinker has evoked the kind of admiration, criticism, reverence that Plato ever did. Whitehead says that he has laid the foundation on which the entire Western political philosophical tradition rests. He says that the entire European philosophical tradition is nothing but a footnote to Plato and Aristotle. Plato and his importance in Western philosophy is because he is the key founder of philosophical idealism, which means for him the key concept is universal idea and not the material reality or the sensory world around us. For him, behind everything there is a universal idea which exists in the eternal reality. If we have to understand the framework within which all other ideas of Plato can be interlinked, it is based on the philosophical idea of good. What is good? Good is betterment of society at large, which means the idea of good will concern about human soul, about human nature, and about human life. For Plato, the most important question is what is a good life or what is the best life? And he says that this important question of how to live the best life or how to lead a good life is inseparable from how a society or polity is organized. So, the question of good life is inseparable from a good political life. And on the basis of the idea of universal idea, which means which exists in the eternal reality for him and not in the sensory world around us, and the key question of what is the idea of good, rest all other thoughts which we will interlink one by one. Now, let's see the key works of Plato. The most important work which has huge influence of Socratic tradition is the Republic. Republic is a work of young Plato. And Republic concerns all aspects of human life. Republic implies in this context the idea of justice and not republic how we understand it today. So the key theme concerning republic may be justice, but all the matters or the subject matter of republic is about all issues of human life. So it is idealistic work because it has Socratic influence and it is work of young Plato. If we look at statesman, here we see that he emphasizes on the superiority of rule of law rather than the idealism that exists in the Republic. So we see that there is a transition in Plato's thought because he realizes that, to create an ideal state is very difficult. It is not possible to do such a thing. So we see transition in his thought. And then he starts to emphasize on the superiority of rule of law. Then comes the laws, where we will see he comes closer to his disciple Aristotle. So Plato is the disciple of Socrates and Aristotle is the disciple of Plato. Now let's see the influences on Plato. So it is well said that in Plato, Socrates lived again. He remarks that I thank God that I was born a Greek and not barbarian, a free man and not a slave, a man and not a woman, but above all, I was born in the age of Socrates, which means there is a key influence of Socrates on Plato. And we can see that in various ideas. So the most important is the idea of good. The philosophical idea of good we already discussed. Virtue is knowledge. What is virtue? Virtue means quality. So what is the key quality? The key quality is to attain knowledge, to attain excellence, to attain wisdom. Then the concept of dialectics. Dialectics is the process of arriving at a conclusion, which means it is a form of argumentation. And what is the process of this argumentation? It is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And then this synthesis can again be reformulated, revised, and it can become a new thesis. So dialectics works like this. And dialectics is one of the most important concepts in the discipline of political science. And all our thinking, the debatable nature in humankind, comes from the concept of dialectics. A very important question before Socrates was that he said, an unexamined life is not worth living, which means human beings do not only exist for the sake of various material aspects of life, but human beings live because they have the ability to reason, the ability to ask the question, what is the difference between right and wrong? And the very concept that human beings have reason and they question what is right and wrong laid the basis for ethics. So, an unexamined life not worth living is a key question of the discipline or the idea of ethics. Now, who are the other thinkers who influenced Plato? In this, there is Pythagoras. And Pythagoras talks about transmigration of soul, just like it is in Jainism and Buddhism. So yes, mathematics, the concept of otherworldliness, immortality of the human soul that we also see that exist where in the Indian traditions, in the Indian philosophical traditions, sexual equality. So the influence and the ideas that Plato talks about with respect to women can also be philosopher, ruler. Women should be educated. Women should be free from the concepts like family. They should only do a sexual union in the marriage and do reproduction. So this concept is also influenced by Pythagoras. And the idea of philosophical ruler, philosopher king. This is also influenced by Pythagoras. Next comes Heraclitus. And Heraclitus says that there is nothing which is permanent in this world. So when we say that there is nothing which is permanent in the world, which means everything is constantly changing. So the idea of change is a constant, is influenced by Heraclitus. And Parmenides, on the other hand, also spoke about everything in this world is permanence. So which means the idea of permanence. So Plato has both kind of strands or threads in his thought, where he says change is only constant. On the other hand, he also says the idea of permanence, which means when we say that he is the father of political idealism, he says there is something known as a universal idea which exists in the eternal reality and which is permanent, which does not change, which means idea remains permanent. So the idea of permanence is used like that when we talk about his philosophical and political idealism. Now, let's talk about Plato and political philosophy. So, what is philosophy? Philosophy is love for wisdom. Anybody who is curious has a philosophical bent of mind. It is said that philosophy is the architectonic science of society, which means it is the basis on which all thinking rests. And political philosophy is the architectonic science of society. Now, when we say philosophy is the pursuit of wisdom or love for wisdom, why there should be wisdom? Wisdom should be to achieve perfection, to achieve your well-being, and to achieve happiness. Why perfection? Why well-being? Why happiness? It is because we want to achieve excellence. And why we want to achieve excellence? The important question is that it is the inbuilt nature of a human being who is social, as well as a citizen who has to achieve excellence. And that's why we say that Plato and philosophy go together. Plato is philosophy, philosophy is Plato. Now, why he is the father of political philosophy, which means he talks about the concept of ideas. So, as we have thinkers like Hobbes, who talk about matter being very important, we have Plato, who doesn't talk about the sensory world or material things. He talks about ideas. Fine? And for him, ideals and values hold a lot of importance, which means he wants to move in the direction of achievement of perfection to achieve excellence, which is inbuilt to every individual. He talks about that the problem of politics can be solved through ethics, because we know, as Socrates says, an unexamined life is not worth living. So he says that man is guided by reason. He can distinguish between right and wrong. So we can never separate ethics and politics. And all the problems of an individual can be by transformation of the soul, by bringing in moral virtues, by bringing in the concept of righteousness. And we'll see that how this entire philosophical thought and the ideas that he's talking about will be virtually linked or vitally linked to all other ideas that we will study today. Then he says, he gives a lot of social orientation to philosophy, which means he links it with the world around, with the state, with the human life, with the political organization, with the society. Fine? That's why Plato and political philosophy go together. Now, so let's see what is this theory of forms or ideas. So we already said that he is the founder of philosophical idealism and political idealism. So how he links this idealism in the public life or in the political life. So he says there is two kind of worlds. One is the visible world, which we can see, which means how we can experience, sensory world, right? Empirical world of sensation, which means the physical world around us. And this world is the world of appearance, which means how it appears to us. On the other hand, there is an invisible world, but this invisible world, which we cannot sense through our sensory organs, through empirical realities, through matter, is the ideal world, because idea emerges in this invisible world. It is there in the mind. So idea is what? What is an idea? Idea comes from where? Who has an idea? So because we have the capacity to reason, so reason का object क्या है? Which means what is the component of reason? The component or object of intellect or reason is idea. तो idea कहाँ से आता है? Reason से आता है, intellect से आता है, right? So he says there is an ideal invisible world which is non-empirical and non-sensory. And the other is the empirical world of sensation, which is the physical visible world, and it is a world of appearances. Fine. Now, so then he says that how will this idea be attained? Which means how will this reason, intellect, how will it develop? It can be developed only through knowledge. What is knowledge for him? Which means if we get knowledge from this sensory world or world of appearances, is it true knowledge for Plato? No, that is not true knowledge for Plato. The true knowledge for Plato is which is certain, which is permanent, which is unchanging, and which is infallible. Which means it cannot be wrong. It remains constant. So he links the concept of idea, which is the form that is there in our mind in the invisible world, which for him is obviously what? Which exists always. हमेशा से चलते आया था. इसीलिए वो कहता है ना, ट्रांसमाइग्रेशन ऑफ सोल, अदर वर्ल्डलीनेस. तो थोड़ा सा मिस्टिसिज्म है प्लेटो में. Fine. And this idea can be attained through knowledge. Knowledge which is certain, permanent, unchanging, and infallible. Now, does everybody have same kind of capacity to attain knowledge? So already Socrates say virtue is knowledge, which means through knowledge we can attain good qualities. Through learning we can attain good qualities. So he uses, in order to explain this, the allegory of cave. What is the allegory of cave? Which means a situation is drawing an analogy कि एक cave है where individuals are sitting in darkness. Why individuals are sitting in darkness? Which means individuals remain in the realm of belief. तो belief क्या है? Belief is something which is based maybe on faith also, like that way. And for him, knowledge is the one that is coming through the daylight. So as in the cave, when these people who are sitting in darkness, मतलब उन्होंने knowledge gain नहीं किया है, वो belief को ही सच मान रहे हैं. They are not saying that this. So when people consider this belief as true knowledge, this is problematic for Plato. So these people have to come out of their beliefs and attain this permanent, certain knowledge. So how this will happen? This will happen through the role of a teacher who brings them from this darkness into light. So he says that different individuals have different capacity to learn and attain knowledge. All right. So through the allegory of cave, he says everybody has to come out of this darkness of beliefs in their life, because otherwise people will start to believe the belief as true knowledge. लेकिन true knowledge वो नहीं है. True knowledge तो उन्हें तब समझ आता है जब they see the daylight. Fine. So how in a cave there is a depiction. That is the context of how ideas, knowledge is interlinked. Fine. Now, so an important statement in this regard is reality is shadow of ideas. So what does this statement mean, that reality is shadow of ideas? मतलब यहाँ पे what is more important for Plato, because he is the father of idealism. For him, an idea is very important. Whatever we see in the sensory world, which is the world visible to us, this reality आप और मैं जो देख रहे हैं, which we can feel, sensory or visible, or the world of appearances. Okay, so for him, behind everything we see in the real world around us, sensory world, what has been there for this creation is a universal idea. That's why the Pythagorean influence of otherworldliness, which means always there is something which is eternal, permanent, that is there. ठीक है? So for him, idea is eternal. It does not change. What we need is not eyesight. मतलब eyesight तो आप और मैं देख पा रहे हैं ना. It is material. It is tangible. But everybody needs what? Vision to see idea. तो eyesight से तो हम आसपास जो दिख रहा है वो सीधा सीधा ऑब्जर्व करते हैं, लेकिन जो रीजन दे पाए, जिसके पास नॉलेज है, जो सोच पाए, जो लव फॉर विजडम रखता हो, philosophical bent of mind रखता हो, that individual only can understand idea. Understood? So that's why he is an idealist and not a materialist. So he says that reality is, not the object, which means this pen is not the reality. But what was the idea behind the creation of this pen is the reality. It is not the object, it is the idea. So behind a horse, it is the idea of horsiness that is important. That's why we call him as the father or starting founder of philosophical idealism and political idealism, because he doesn't believe in the material world or objects as true, but the idea, the universal eternal thing that is going behind creation of this reality. And this reality here implies the sensory, visible appearances, world of appearances. So he will not give lot of importance to this world of senses, because sensory world can also lead us to some opinions. But knowledge and opinion are different, no? Knowledge is not opinion. Knowledge is achieved, okay? Which means we attain wisdom through knowledge. And for attaining knowledge, we need to have what? Reason. All right? So reality is shadow of ideas implies this. Now, let's move to his next concept. So we have understood his philosophical idealism and how he applies this in everything. मतलब अब वो जो भी कहेंगे इसके बाद, उस सब में इस आइडिया या परफेक्शन अचीव करने का, या एक्सीलेंस अचीव करने का, या गुड अचीव करने का ही ऑब्जेक्टिव दिखेगा. Everything is philosophical. How much practical it is, he is not concerned, because he is an idealist. He wants to move towards perfection, towards excellence. तुम सिर्फ छोटी चीज देख पा रहे हो, तो वो कहता है सिर्फ इतना मत देखो, परफेक्शन, इसका बेस्ट वर्जन क्या होगा, right? So for that you need a vision. All right? So how do we answer this question? So we say that there are two traditions within political thought. One is the idealist tradition and one is the materialist tradition. And Plato belongs to the idealist tradition. And what is idealist? Which means emphasizes on what? Emphasizes on ideas and not reality. What is the concept of idea? Idea is object of intellect or reason. It is attained through knowledge, which is different from the sensory world, which is the reality. Okay? Now, and this is what leads to what? The political purpose is, that's how he creates the concept of ideal state. Ideal state is one which is ruled by philosopher king, where there will be justice and all other things. And we can resolve the problem of all political conditions and issues through what? Through idealism, according to Plato. Okay, this is the essence actually of this statement. Now, next is the theory of three classes and three souls. So, what does Plato mean by souls and how is he organizing them into classes? So, he says different individuals have different capacities. Okay, which means all are not born equal for Plato. So, we know he belongs to an aristocratic family, and so he thinks that all are not born equal and all cannot be treated equal. Everybody has a very different capacity. So he says there are three things. One is reason, one is spirit, and one is appetite. In different souls, different things dominate. So where there is reason, the virtue is wisdom. Where there is spirit, courage is the virtue that will be of that person. And where there is appetite, there is restraint or temperance in behavior. So this is the virtue of the souls. And these are the key elements. Actually, all of them are present, but this becomes the dominant virtue. Okay? So he says these three classes have these three as dominant virtues. So the ruling class has which virtue as dominant? Reason in their soul. So what will develop? Wisdom will develop. The warriors will have spirit, so courage will develop. And artisans and producers have appetite as dominating, so temperance will develop. All right. So according to the domination of these three different elements in the soul, these virtues are developing. And that is how society has to be organized, which means these three classes will do three different kinds of work. He uses the term guardian class. And guardian class implies ruling class as well as warriors, which means the kings as well as the soldiers. Fine. So whenever we use the term guardian class in Platonian sense, it implies the ruling class as well as warriors, not the producers or the artisans. Okay. तो जिसके सोल में कौन सी क्वालिटी डोमिनेंट है, वैसा ही इंसान की क्वालिटीज बिहेवियर बनता है और उन्हें वैसा ही काम करना चाहिए. This is also leading to the concept of functional specialization. Who should do what in society? What work is associated? So theory of souls and classes organization is vitally linked to functional specialization and linked to the theory of justice. Now, let's talk about his concept of justice. So what is justice for Plato? So justice is the key theme of Republic. Republic, we say, is concerning justice. So we have understood justice more in a conventional sense, associated with law, with legal aspects. But is justice so conventionally or traditionally understood by Plato? No. Justice for Plato is a moral concept. Justice is a bond that links all classes of society when all the classes, according to the virtues of their souls, do a typical kind of job, which means functional specialization. Justice is when everybody will do their duty correctly. So, in essence, justice for him is righteousness. It is moral. And why it is moral and not only legal as we understand justice today? Because he says there is justice in society when everybody does their duty. Everyone does good to everyone, which means it should not be relative. It is always universal. It is only when everyone does their duty, there will not be conflicts in society. And when there will not be conflicts, we will see harmony in society. So this is how justice is perceived by Plato. Fine. So he says he gives a very unconventional idea, which means for him justice is not legal or judicial. He says it is moral concept, it is the inner nature of the human spirit, right? Everyone will be righteous. Everyone has righteousness. Fine. So justice is functional specialization, which means which class has which soul and the virtues associated with it. They should do that kind of work. फंक्शनल स्पेशलाइजेशन मतलब उसको वही काम ought to do, जिसको जो असाइंड ड्यूटी है तुम वही करो, दैट इज व्हाट यू आर ought to do. Fine. And this functional specialization will lead to a just society. So we understood why it will lead, because वहां पे conflicts नहीं होगी, सबके काम distributed होंगे, सबकी qualities के हिसाब से उनके काम and work and duties are associated. So then there will not be any conflicts, there will be harmonization. If there is harmonization, eventually we will have a just society. So it is both public as well as private, which means you do in your life all duty bound things, then even in private as well as public sphere, justice will be established. Now, how does he arrive at justice? Through dialectics, okay, which means through debates. So there is Cephalus, Polemarchus, who say doing your duty and good to friend and harm to enemy is justice. Plato agrees with the early part, which means he says yes, justice is about doing your duty very well, but he doesn't agree that you should harm your enemy. Doing good to your friends and harm to enemy. No. Justice is not relative. It is not creating harm. It is universal. Then Thrasymachus say interest of stronger, which means the one who formulates laws will formulate laws which are good in their own interest, which means the kings. But Plato says no, this is not correct. For example, if a farmer is producing crops, a shoemaker is making shoes, does he mean he will wear all the shoes? Or farmer is doing cultivation only to eat all the crops on his own, all the food on his own? No. So similarly, even the lawmaker, the statesman, the king does not do everything in his own interest. He does, maybe he knows that, how to evade these things, or he may utilize them in his own interest. But not necessarily all application of these laws is in the interest of the stronger only, or the ones who formulate it. Right? So that is the idea. Then is Glaucon. He says it is in the interest of the weaker. So he says no, justice is like an art. It is not only either for the strong, only for the weak. It is universal. It should be beneficial to everybody. We cannot do a redistribution which is only favorable again to the weaker sections of society. Then there will not be harmony because the other sections might rebel. So, how, like an artist, you establish harmonization, right, amongst the conflicting interest in society is justice. That's why it is moral, it is righteousness. Fine? So, these are the concepts of justice that he is talking of. So, a key statement here is state is individual writ large. What does this concept, what is the idea behind this question? Which means the state is writ large, which means state is magnified version of an individual. Which means if we can establish something at the individual level, then this can be done even at the level of the state. Because states are not coming from anywhere. They all are composed of what? States are composed of citizens, of individuals. So if we have good individuals, moral individuals who establish, who have good social virtues, then the state that we are going to establish will also be nice. It will be good. Fine. So, when he says state is individual, what is his aim? His aim is to establish an ideal state. He has a different meaning to the concept of ideal state. For him, ideal state consists of all those characteristics or all those ideas that he thinks is needed to have this ideal state, which means communism, it should be ruled by a philosopher king, it should have justice, which means people doing their duties, functional specialization. Fine. So, ideal state for him is the one which has all these attributes. So, he says ideal state is the one which is based on idea of justice, which means God's idea. What is God's idea? God's idea is in the soul, at the level of the soul. Okay. So, just soul is one which has what? Which has reason. Fine. So, based on this, state is eventually magnified version of individual. So, if at the level of the soul, means according to soul, if an individual is doing the assigned duty, so at the level of individual, justice is being established because God has given everyone virtues, qualities of the soul. And according to in which soul, which element is dominant, किसी में appetite है, किसी में courage है, किसी में reason है. Accordingly, the other qualities will develop. So, this is God given, right? So, state is magnified version of the individual. So, we see that an individual who is enabled or who has knowledge, who can do differentiation between right and wrong, who has reason. Okay. If that happens, then automatically at the level of the state also it will happen, right? So, here it is about the continuity of ethics and politics. What can be done at the level of individual can be done at the level of the state. So, he says that states do not come out of oak or rock, but they are inherent in the human mind. So, in the human mind, which means the reason, mind का ही quality है ना, reason कहाँ से आता है? Mind से आता है, ठीक है? तो वही हमारे soul को guide कर रहा है, किसमें क्या domination है, fine? And this is the idea. So, whatever is there in the mental state, that will be there in the real life. Now, let's move to his concept of education. Okay. Now, how important is education in his entire theoretical or philosophical premise? Okay. So, Rousseau says that the work Republic is a treatise on education, which means it emphasizes a lot on education. It is a contribution to or an elaborate scheme of how education or pedagogy should be. What should be the best way to do reform in society? What is that instrument? That instrument is education. So, for him, what is the key aim? First, it was the philosophical idea of good, which means betterment of society at large. And he says that the question of good life cannot be separated from the question of how society or polity is organized. So, it cannot be separated from political life. So, what is his aim? His aim is to establish an ideal state. Ideal state के क्या-क्या characteristics हैं? तो ideal state में होता है justice. Okay. Now, in this ideal state, if we want to establish justice, state is individual writ large, understood? So, if we want to establish justice, what is the instrument available? It is education. Why? What does education do? How will it bring justice? So, it will activate the soul. It will activate reason and it will enable individuals to reach towards the truth. It will bring moral reforms in society. Fine. So, it will touch the evil at its source so that these evils don't happen in society. If we educate somebody, we are training their soul, we are training their mind, we are enabling them to know what is right, wrong, and then that person can reach to truth. So, what will happen? such an individual who is educated within this state and where we want to establish justice, that is functional specialization, just characteristics, righteousness, जिसके पास एजुकेशन है वो सिटीजन सिर्फ सिटीजन नहीं रहेगा, that person will be a virtuous citizen. Okay, because why? What is he saying? So he says, no, knowledge, achieving excellence, perfection के लिए क्या चाहिए? Knowledge चाहिए, right? So this virtuous citizen will be the path of social righteousness in the society. This virtuous citizen will contribute in the public sphere. That's why he gives an elaborate scheme. Okay, fine. It will lead to what? The path of social righteousness. So this is education for him. तो ideal state को achieve करने के लिए जहाँ justice है, we need education to bring these changes, touch problems in the mind, in the soul, and make good individuals, virtuous citizens, and they will establish righteousness in the society. So it will be social righteousness as well. ठीक है? Now he gives a very elaborate scheme of education. Fine. And he says a state control system of compulsory education. Is his education for everyone? No, his education is only for the guardian class, okay, which means the rulers and the warrior class. It is not for the artisans and the producing class. Now, so what kind of education it is? It is a state control system, and this is compulsory, which means the state will be designing the curriculum. The state will tell what has to be learned, what should not be learned. Okay, so it is a state control system of compulsory education. Now, there are Athenian features as well as Spartan features in his scheme, which means he's taken the good of both systems and combined them and made his own version. Okay. So for example, what is from Athens that he takes? That is the methodology of Athens, private education. For males only it was, it spoke about freedom. It was more creative and philosophical. And Spartan influence, what was there in Sparta? So it was state controlled, it was for both males and females, it was strict and disciplined in characteristic, and it has physical and literature. So he combines the best features of both these methodology and devises his own scheme. Okay, so he wants to make it creative, philosophical also, and he wants to make it military, scientific as well. Okay, now it is only for the guardian class. So he talks about 3 stages of education, and there will be filtering for every process. Now, why this education has been devised in this filtering? Why it is in these kind of stages? Which means every individual's capacity, right? With respect, there will be like filtering at every process. Like how in the UPSC we have filtering, prelims, mains, interview, and then the final rank. Similarly, सबकी capacity अलग होगी ना, education को absorb करने की, doing more philosophical thought process. So he says there will be elimination at various stages. So elementary education is from 6 to 20 years of age. Higher education is at 20 to 35, and practical education is from 35 to 50. So with every stage you will learn different things. The elementary education, okay, it will be talking more about gymnastics, music. Then 6 to 18, there are more different subjects that will be learned. And 18 to 20, there will be military training. Higher education, 20 to 30, more focus on logic and literature. And 30 to 35, there is focus on philosophy and dialectics. And when in this period of 30 to 35, you learn philosophy, dialectics, more thought process, more excellence, more perfection, then you are ready for the practical training, which will happen between 35 to 50. Okay. So at various stages, the scheme of education will work. Obviously, now this is more brainwashing, very, undemocratic also. It is more, restricting also, because state will doing everything. So there has been criticism also, right? Very theoretical, very abstract. There have been different views on how he perceives education. So understand what is the role of education. Now we can clearly link. So we can clearly link what? His idea of his concept of theory of ideas, with how he links it to knowledge, because ideas form the basis for knowledge, and how he links it to the allegory of cave. Then how this will lead to the concept of justice, before, and the theory of souls and classes. Then how this will lead to establishment of justice, how justice is not legal or judicial, and how it is more associated with soul. To establish justice, what has to be done? We need to have education, which will work like a moral reformer, soul reformer, reason reformer, which will establish path of social righteousness. Okay? Now, so how the scheme will work? You'll have to know those facts as well. Okay? Now, let's talk about communism of wives and property. Now, when we talk about communism of wives and property, is this communism, which means not having property for everybody in the society, or not every class having a family, not having a marriage for every section of the society? No. This communism of wives and property, which means this kind of a sacrifice, has been devised only for the guardian class, not for the producer class, not for the artisans, not for the lower rungs of society. It is only those who rule. For them, sacrifice has to be done, which means they are the one who should not have family. They are the one who should not possess property. They are the one who should live in common sphere, and all their needs will be met by the state. Why so? So that they can very easily work for public welfare. Okay? Which means this is the thought for having communism of wives and property only for the guardian class, not for everybody. Okay? Now, we very clearly know that he wants to establish the ideal state. Ideal state, we know, has various characteristics. We learn them just about a few minutes later, where there is existence of justice, which means there is functional specialization, there is righteousness, everybody is doing their duty, everybody is morally active, which means they do moral behavior towards each other. Nobody will do conflict. There is harmonization. Now, in this ideal state where justice will be there, what can create a problem? What is it that can create disturbance? That is property and families. What does property do? Property is which quality of which soul, which means it is which soul जहाँ पे appetite ज़्यादा है, ठीक है, right? So that person will possess property. And families lead to what? Which means you have more attachment. So what will happen in public sphere? Nepotism will happen in public sphere. Now both these, possession of appetite and issues like nepotism, corruption, are problematic for the public sphere. So those who rule should not possess property and should not have families. Okay? Now, so it is only for the ruling elite, that is the guardian class. Alright? Property brings economic motives. We should not have economic motives. Those who want to rule should not have economic motives. If there is no property, corruption will be mitigated at its source. People will not do corruption, their needs are met. So they don't want to have more. They will not misutilize the public resource. No lust for property already. So guardian class will not have lust for property because everything is possessed in common. And everybody will do their duty. Okay? Family. So he says that the whole concept of, communism of property and family are actually vitally linked to establishment of ideal state. Understood? Now, so we understood what are the advantages of having communism of private property. So where will such people live? They will live in barracks. They will, all the food and everything, their daily needs will be met. There will be barracks which will be created by the state where they can have their residence. Okay? So state will meet all these needs. Now, communism of wives. Okay, so he says, what is marriage for him? How we visualize marriage? Marriage is like a spiritual union. Okay, marriage is like a spiritual union. But for Plato, what is marriage? Marriage is only a sexual union. Why sexual union? Marriage is only for reproduction. So he gives is like it is a temporary sexual union for bearing children. Okay, only for reproduction and continuation of human race. That is his idea. Fine. And how this whole process of reproduction will happen? It will happen on festivals. Certain days will be allocated, right? And who will bear the children? I mean, who will take care of the children? So there will be well-trained nurses, which means all the children which come from this temporary sexual union will be cared by the state. And state will make good citizens, train them well, and then they will serve the interest of the state. Okay? So, is there any advantage of having such kind of communism of family? Which means family which is belonging to everybody and not only to the two people who are creating this family. So, according to him, there are advantages. One is for the political purpose, which means it will solve problem of corruption, nepotism, misutilization of resources. So, for political purpose, this communism of family is good. Moral purpose, which means it will lead to what? It will lead to upliftment of women. Okay, which means women will be overcoming all these duties of management of private sphere, of taking care of the families, of, it will eventually lead to their liberation. And when it is leading to their liberation, they can participate very happily where in the public sphere. So, is there any eugenic purpose also? Which means any biological? Yes, it will lead to the what? Creation of the best or good offsprings, because we are getting mating between the two best citizens who are very healthy. So it has, leading to best race creation. It leads to political implication. It leads to even moral implications. Now let's see the difference between Plato's communism and modern communism. What is it that led to its origin and how it was different from each other? So we see that it is the circumstances in Athens in Greece that lead to thoughts of Plato advocating such kind of methods like communism of family and private property. Okay, so he wanted what? So his objective is more political because he doesn't want appetite or he doesn't want nepotism and corruption in the state. So his objective is more in the political direction. He wanted more unity in the state and not division in the state because of these kind of elements that can lead to what? Problems. On the other hand, we look at modern communism, which was there in the works of Karl Marx. It is more in the context of the changes that had been brought by the Industrial Revolution, which led to rise of the bourgeoisie and the bad conditions for the proletariat class. So his context of origin of modern communism is more economic in character. The objective was to bring about economic changes. Now, if we look at the economic structure, this is not changing the economic structure wholly. Okay. On the other hand, modern communism will bring about the base. The base is the economic structure. This will change, and when this base economic structure changes, the superstructure changes. But here it is not impacting the entire economic structure, because yes, property we also see will be possessed. There is no communism of property by the producer and the artisan class. So whole structure does not bring about change like that. With respect to spread, it was only restricted. This communism was restricted to the Greek city-state. And this is also we see proletarian, which had an international spread. Okay, so they were doing it at a global level. They also saw capitalism as an international phenomenon, and how from the national, like because of colonization, changes will come, and then this will also spread to other. So communist international, other things were also there in that regard. So they were having and trying to bring a more international characteristic. Fine. And application over here is only for the guardian class. But here on the other hand, modern communism is for the application is towards the whole of society. All right. So over there in communism of Plato, there is more of sharing of property. There is sharing of wives for the sake of reproductive purposes. On the other hand, the communism in modern times is common ownership of property, which means property should not be amassed only by the wealthy and concentration of wealth with the wealthy. Here it is not that way. Here it is how we will, communism implied how everything will be shared in common in these two aspects. And over there, how it will be owned by everybody in common. Fine. So this is the kind of difference that we see in the communism of Plato and modern communism. Now, the next concept, which is very, very important, is the philosopher king or the philosopher ruler, which means if we look at these terms, a king or a ruler, who is a philosopher? Which means who is a philosopher? Which means who has love for wisdom, who is having curiosity, who is knowledgeable, who has achieved excellence through acquisition of knowledge. That person is the ideal person to rule. Why? Because the politician has the ability to grab power by even charisma and spreading false narrative. But a philosopher will do what kind of propagation? A philosopher has knowledge and he has wisdom. And because he has knowledge and wisdom, he is a person who will not lead the masses to the wrong path. So, a person who is having wisdom and knowledge is the ideal person to rule. And not any person who is elected even by spreading false agenda, which means they can brainwash the ignorant masses. So a person who rules should have noble intentions according to Plato. This is the idea of why we should have a learned person, a person who has wisdom that he has acquired through, he has the ability to sacrifice. So philosopher king or philosopher ruler is the linchpin of the ideal state. Ideal state is one which is ruled by the philosopher king who establishes justice. Why? Because he has reason, wisdom as the dominant characteristic. This is the perfect order of society. Okay. Now, so in this context, things have to be visualized. Now, let's see that why only philosopher king and why not any individual can become a king. What is so special about the qualities of the philosopher king? So, he has knowledge, he has intellect, he is trained. We see higher training after 35 to 50 that will happen. Filtering process happens in Plato's scheme of education. So, he's got training to govern. Okay, and he has less thirst for power. Only that person who doesn't have a thirst for power is the right person to rule, because for that person, achieving power is not the key motive. Now, this will distinguish Plato as an idealist from Machiavelli, who is a practical realist, who says the whole of politics is what? About power. So, he is making power as a key variable for political analysis. On the other hand, Plato as an idealist say no, a person who will rule should not have the thirst to rule. He should be a person who wants to do good, who wants to achieve the philosophical idea of good. He wants to govern. He doesn't want to acquire power. He wants to do welfare. Okay? So that's why philosopher king. And why philosopher king should rule? The qualities to philosopher king ke paas ye hai, because of the education that he has received, is because he wants to achieve the idea of good, betterment of society at large, reform human soul, human being, human nature, human life. And statecraft is soul craft. Why we say statecraft is soul craft? What is soul craft? Philosophy is soul craft. Why? Because philosophy is love for wisdom, moving towards perfection, excellence, achieving excellence. So a person who has love for wisdom, who has achieved excellence, if they can move towards that kind of a journey, they are the right person who can change others also to move towards that kind of a journey and path. Okay, so statecraft is soul craft. Fine. So there is no de-link between philosophy and politics, ethics and politics. Fine for Plato. Political is equal to ethical because they have the ability to transform. They don't have bad motive. Philosopher king. He has the ability to sacrifice and he's achieved the training to govern. He has a character which is full of virtues. And virtues, which means good qualities, how are they achieved? They're not in the air. They're achieved by knowledge. Knowledge which is not illusory, which is from this sensory organ that masses have. The learned person. Knowledge which is permanent. Because he understands idea, he has reason. So he knows what is the perfect way of doing things. How to achieve excellence. That's why he has very strong character. Okay. And he's very public spirited, which means he's not doing this for his own ambition. Okay. He's not ambitious. Alright. And he says that this person who has gone through such a long journey. See, anybody who has to attain wisdom should have free mind. Right? So leisure actually is very important to achieve wisdom. Because only in leisure you think. Fine. That's why he will be able to think with this long term of training and he will do good for the community and the society. Alright? He will be able to administer justice. That's why philosopher king should be the person who should rule. He loved truth. Okay? And he knows what is the importance of the ideal, the idea. He can visualize that because he has a vision which he come because of this kind of training. The philosopher ruler is different from ruler. He has love for wisdom. Okay? Now, Plato as an anti-democrat. So, we know that Plato believed that, the allegory of cave. So, he talks, how people are behind the shadows, which means they are thinking their belief of something is true, which is problematic. So, this ignorant masses have to be trained. They have to come out of this illusory world, which they think is the truth. Fine. So, when we say that he is anti-democrat, which means he doesn't believe in the capacity of masses because they think everything that they can see in the sensory world is true. So, he says masses are ignorant. So, he says we can't leave the state or rule in hand of these masses who are so ignorant. Fine. And that is more because of the situation that was there in Athens. So his belief of against democracy, rule by people, is not in this sense, which means everybody should not be able to rule. No. Okay, it has to be. So he is in this sense elitist also. Fine. He says there are defects in what? Democracy. There are problems in the working of democracy. That's why he calls it as a rule of ignorant masses. It leads to the spirit of individualism and not in the welfare of everybody. And such kind of rule brings more instability than stability. Fine, it will keep changing. And it is against natural inequality. Why? Because democracy allows everybody to rise. So he says, but no, everybody is not born equal. The theory of souls, he says all men are not born equal. Everybody has a different capacity to learn. So in this context that things have to be, so he is an anti-democrat in this sense. Fine. Now, yes, so we say they are aristocratic conservatives. Okay. Now, Plato's ideal state. So he talks of everything as ideal. For him, ideal, matlab to achieve that perfect idea of anything, we have to move towards that. So ideal state भी कैसा होगा? Ideal. मतलब उसमें सब कुछ perfect characteristic होने चाहिए. What is this ideal state in his vision? So in his vision, because he is also the father of political idealism, he gives emphasis on universal idea. So he has an idea of the ideal state also. What is his idea of the ideal state? Is where the idea of good is being realized. How this idea of good will be realized, which means betterment of society at large, philosophical idea of good, right? How this will be realized? This will be realized by establishing such kind of characteristics that he is advocating. That is, philosopher king, justice should be there, which means everybody is doing their duty, there is righteousness, there is functional specialization, no conflict will happen. Education is there, it is done in 3 stages. Then classes do all the assigned functions. So there are rulers, there are warriors, there are producers. Communism of family and property is there. Women can also participate in the public sphere. This is ideal state for whom? Plato. अब ये realize हो या नहीं हो, ये बात अलग है. But एक ideal state में ऐसी सब चीजें होनी चाहिए. So many of these things are not relevant, many are relevant. Fine. Now, so then he says that this ideal state that he is advocating as his thoughts reform will be difficult to realize. So he says in the laws, the second best state, which means it is not only about authority. Philosopher king possesses immense authority, no? Because for him, philosopher king is one who has wisdom, who has achieved excellence, perfection. That person can do no wrong. But in the laws, he says no, even individual can do wrong. So we can't give all authority to the individual. So then he says there has to be balance between freedom, liberty and authority. Because maybe the philosopher king's rule can lead to a tyranny, despotism, which he was okay with, because he says no, it will not lead to tyranny and despotism. Philosopher king is very learned, he has wisdom. But if it does, then so we have to create some kind of restraint, some mechanism. So he says there has to be balance between authority and family in the laws. So second best state, it is a government by law, rule of law will be there. Okay? So monarchy, but also freedom to people, right, in order to participate in other things. And private property will be permitted, all right, because it also gives a sense of achievement, as who says? Aristotle. Now there are debates because of the duty aspect that Plato has focused on, and how he is against democracy. So a very well-known thinker, liberal thinker says, that is Karl Popper says, he is an enemy of open society. Now what is an open society? An open society is one which is not focusing on holism. Holism was there in whose thought? In Plato's thought, because he looks at everything as an absolute idea, a universal idea. Comprehensiveness is there in Plato's wisdom. For him, whole is more important then it's part, right? So Karl Popper says that he is enemy of open society because he is focusing on holism. Whole is more important, individual is not important. What is Karl Popper? He is a liberal scholar. So he will say individual is also important. Democracy is also very important, right? Freedom of freedom of speech is very important. All this is being curbed by whom? All this is being curbed in the thoughts of Plato. So Plato is termed as when scholars wanted to trace the origins of fascism, totalitarianism in the Western political tradition, who was the first one they blamed on? They blamed on Plato. Plato के thought में हमें कहाँ totalitarianism or fascist tendencies दिखती हैं, right? But there are arguments which say yes, there are certain threads in Plato's thought where we can say that yes, he can be called as forerunner of fascism and totality. And others say no, not necessary. Both are very different thought processes. Both are very different ideas, right? So arguments which favor that Plato is the forerunner of fascism and totalitarian idea is whole is prior to part. Duties for him is more important than rights. In his communism, an individual is subordinated. Education is also completely controlled by the state. What has to be taught, what has not to be taught, right? And he is an anti-democrat. On the other hand, arguments against are that Plato is very systematic. Fascism is hodgepodge of ideas. They have brought in some things together to form some coherent concept which was never coherent in nature. Philosophically, so first came philosophy in Plato and then talks about state. So for him, the universal idea is important. For him, the ideal is important. For him, there is some in the eternal reality also there is universe. So for him, philosophy came first. And then he talks about the ideal state. On the other hand, fascist state and authoritarian rule had been established. And then they devised scholars to weave a philosophy. तो वहां पे तो systematization है ही नहीं. Then there is reason in Plato, right? So what is idea? We say idea is object of intellect or reason. So there is reason, right? And reason we achieve through knowledge, right? On the other hand, fascism is irrational. Plato, all this is doing, the ruler is doing for welfare of the subjects. On the other hand, ruler is very self-interested. The philosophical ruler, philosopher king, is ready to sacrifice. He sacrificed whole life for this people's welfare, for social good. On the other hand, we know the dictatorial tendencies of the fascist rulers. His idea was woven in the public sphere. And here there was no liberation of women in fascism, but he was talking of women in the public sphere, right? So in this way, there are arguments against and for, where we talk of Plato as forerunner of totalitarianism. Next important question comes is, to what extent we can say that Plato is one of the first feminist? Why feminist? Why we call him as feminist? Where is he giving importance to women? So first, his own academy admitted women. He talks about education for males as well as females. Philosopher king, even the king can become, even the female can become philosopher queen. Fine. Abolition of family so that women are liberated. So we understood the moral purpose, the political purpose of why communism of wives or communism of family, which means women will be liberated and then they can politically participate. They will be overcoming reproduction karke aap come to the public sphere, right? There is no need to take care of children. State will do that. So abolition of family also liberates women. That's why Plato is termed as first feminist. But do you think he's doing all this was in order to give women rights? His purpose was for women's welfare? No. His primary objective is to create a state or the ideal state which he thinks. And uska result is that women will be liberated. But feminists have a different thought process. For them, the primary idea is equal status of women with men, right? So objective, consequential as well as primary, are different in both, in modern feminism and Plato. Alright, now we have to talk of the relevance of Plato as a thinker. So, if we look at the link between politics and ethics, we see that even in Gandhi's non-violence. He says politics without principles is problematic. Then philosophy is also a key to theory. Rawls has also revived political philosophy in his key theory of justice. Ideas are driving the world today. So artificial intelligence is an idea now which is coming true. Someone has thought of it. So ideas are very important. We every day talk of new ideas. We talk of, this idea, that idea, which means some reason in an individual guides us to make this society a better place. And that's why new ideas are appreciated. Fine. Justice, the moral dimension, is relevant even today or no? So, constitutional morality, changing morality, societal morality changing, all this is moral aspect of justice, right? Education, yes, women's education has been emphasized. State also giving education, elementary education today we can see. Family and property ideas also. So, family, the idea is not very relevant, and there is private property which exists. So, these things are there which are not so relevant, but that was not there even in Aristotle. Philosophical king, yes, the concept of having prime ministers who have sacrificed their life to govern. So there is more legitimacy to such kind of rulers even in today's world. Fine. And feminism also, yes, so we see feminism being relevant today, how women should come in the public sphere. Alright, so yes, many of Plato's ideas are relevant even today. I hope you understood and the essence of every concept has been very clear. In the next class, we will revise Aristotle together. Thank you so much.